It was just another Friday night in the emergency department. Loud, fast, barely controlled chaos. Trauma Bay 2 had just received a middle-aged man in cardiac arrest. Room 6 needed transport for a possible stroke. The psych hold in 4A was screaming again, and I was somewhere in the middle of it all. Charting, suctioning, compressing, stabilizing, doing what we do. You don't stop to think during those shifts. You move. You listen for beeps, screams, silence. All three are important in different ways. We were short that night, like we often are. Half the newer staff had called in sick after a bad flu outbreak, and we were running the ER on a skeleton crew. I had just stepped out of Trauma Bay 1, finishing up with a teenage girl who'd overdosed. We'd pushed naloxone. She came back swinging. I'd stayed with her while she sobbed, helped get her into a gown, and held her hair while she vomited. I was mentally cataloging what needed to happen next. IV fluids, talk screen, maybe psych consult, when I looked across the nurse's station and noticed her. She was standing at the medication pyxis, blue scrubs, short dark hair, surgical mask pulled low under her chin, the kind of nurse you barely notice because she looks like she's belonged there forever. I watched her work, typing in her code, retrieving supplies like someone who knew the system. But there was something slightly off. Not eerie, not dramatic, just unplaceable. Like her badge wasn't clipped right, like the stethoscope around her neck wasn't one of the standard issue Littmans most of us carried. It looked older, thicker tubing, heavy, the kind my preceptors used when I was a baby nurse. She caught me watching her, and nodded. Just a simple, "I've got this" kind of nod. I nodded back, assuming she'd been pulled from another unit. Maybe from ICU, maybe afloat. I turned to assist with an elderly patient in respiratory distress in 5B. When I came back to the station 10 minutes later, she was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. It happens. People come and go. ICU nurses drop in for code support. Even housekeeping sometimes helps reposition patients. But when I sat down to chart and started delegating tasks, I realized none of my team had seen her. I asked Amy, my usual partner on nights, "Hey, who was that nurse pulling morphine from the pyxis earlier?" She frowned. "Who?" "Short hair, maybe late 30s. Blue scrubs." I thought she was from upstairs. Amy shook her head. "We've been on our own all night. Nobody else has come through." That was strange. I went back into the pyxis to see the user log. We always leave a trace. Even floaters need their fingerprint and code. I filtered the activity by time. There was no login for the 10-minute window when I saw her. No one had accessed it at all except me, and I'd been in a different part of the department. I tried to let it go, told myself I was tired. Maybe I misremembered the time. Maybe it was someone I didn't recognize because of the constant mask changes. But something about her stayed with me. A few nights later, I brought it up during shift change, more as a curiosity than a ghost story. "You ever see a nurse just appear and disappear in the ER?" I asked. Renee, one of the older night shifters, looked up from her coffee. She had been there nearly 2 decades. "You saw her?" I blinked. "Who?" "The one with the old Littman, short hair." I nodded slowly. She stared into her cup for a moment. "We don't talk about it much. New people don't notice her. But every once in a while, when we're swamped, when things are right, at the breaking point, someone sees her. Quiet, helps, then vanishes." "But who is she?" I asked, my voice low. Renee leaned back in her chair. "There was a nurse who died on shift, years ago. A code went south. Patient didn't make it. She stayed behind to clean up. Got locked in the supply room when a fire broke out from a faulty oxygen tank. They found her after it was too late." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It never came. "You really believe that?" Renee shrugged. "I don't know what I believe, but when people say they saw her, it's always the same. Old stethoscope, blue scrubs, and that nod. Since then, I haven't seen her again. But sometimes when we're down to 3 nurses, running beds for 20 patients, and I feel a sudden sense of calm, like one less thing to worry about, I wonder, not everything in the ER can be explained. Some things just are, and maybe that's enough. Hello friends, thank you so much for tuning in. A special shout out to our incredible subscribers. Your support keeps these chilling stories alive. But here's something to consider. Only 30% of our viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy our content, hitting that subscribe button helps us more than you might realize. It only takes a second, but makes a world of difference. And while you're at it, a like and share go a long way in keeping the eerie tales coming. Thank you once again for being part of this journey. You're the reason we're here. See you in the next one, if you dare. The night the boy came in, I was already 3 hours into my shift. We had 2 traumas rolling in. One was a construction fall, the other a pediatric code. I remember tightening the strap on my stethoscope and walking briskly toward Bay 3, where they were setting up for the child. The boy was maybe 11, maybe 12. Blood soaked through the white gauze wrapped around his midsection. We didn't have time for introductions or explanations. The paramedics were already performing compressions. His father, he came in gripping the stretcher, not letting go until security gently moved him away. We used everything. Oxygen, high flow, chest compressions continued for over 30 minutes. The defibrillator pads were applied twice. We started lines in both arms, 16-gauge IVs for rapid fluid resuscitation. I pushed epinephrine twice, then atropine. The crash cart drawers were open, wrappers and syringes littering the floor. I remember the attending whispering, come on, to no one in particular, and then silence. There's a stillness that comes when a code is called, the kind where you only hear your breath, and maybe the wheeled cart being rolled away. The heart monitor showed a flat line. One of the nurses turned it off. Another began to clean the child's face with a warm, damp cloth. I stood beside the father, who had watched the entire thing unfold through a small opening in the curtain. I'm sorry, the attending said, gently. The man didn't move. He was frozen there, eyes locked on his son's chest, still now, no longer rising. I walked with him to the family room. That room never gets easier. It has soft chairs and tissues on the table, as if that makes grief less jagged. He sat, elbows on knees, and stared at the floor. I asked if there was anyone we could call for him. He shook his head. It was just the 2 of us, he said. He came back exactly 7 days later. It was around 2 a.m. I didn't recognize him at first. His chart said abdominal pain, nausea. He looked thin, worn, not from time but from something deeper. Grief, I think, wears the body out faster than age. We brought him to Bay 7, monitors on. Vital signs were stable, but I noticed his heart rate was slightly elevated. Nothing alarming. I placed a nasal cannula for oxygen, started an IV, and drew labs. As I took his history, he paused often. He'd start a sentence and then trail off. Finally, while I was checking the infusion pump for his fluids, he said, I saw my boy yesterday. I stopped typing. He looked me in the eye. There was no hesitation, no dramatic air, just fact. I saw him, not in a dream, not like a memory. I woke up and he was sitting on the edge of my bed, said he was okay. I sat down beside the stretcher. Sometimes in the ER, you have to stop being clinical. He went on. He didn't say much else, just smiled, touched my hand. That's all. I nodded. There wasn't much to say. I've learned in this job that silence, if given kindly, can be more healing than explanation. He said he'd been trying to make sense of it, wondered if it was the grief, or if maybe, just maybe, it really happened. He asked if I thought it was real. I told him what I've told others over the years. Grief does strange things, but love, especially the love between a parent and a child, is strong enough to echo across things we don't fully understand. He didn't cry. He looked tired, but somehow lighter. Like maybe, just maybe, he could get up and move forward again. His labs came back fine. We gave him fluids, kept him for observation, then discharged him with a follow-up. Before he left, he stopped at the nurse's station. I was charting. He said, "Thank you for remembering him." I wanted to say so many things, that I still saw his son's face when I closed my eyes, that I remembered the way his hand looked in mine as I checked for a pulse, that none of us forget the ones we lose in that room. But I just nodded and said, he mattered to us too, and that was enough. That's the thing about working in the ER. Some days you save a life, some days you hold someone's hand as they let go, and sometimes if you're lucky you bear witness to the quiet, inexplicable ways people carry love with them, even after death. I've been an ER nurse for over 20 years and I've seen a lot of things that'll stick with me long after I leave the floor. Trauma codes that never got a pulse back. Family members crumbling in the hallway. Kids who didn't make it home from school. But this was different. Not dramatic, not violent, just quietly wrong. It was a Thursday night, not especially busy, not particularly slow. We had 3 traumas in the bay, 1 detox and restraints, and the usual stream of febrile elderly and sprained ankles. Around 10:30 p.m., EMS wheeled in a middle-aged woman with a broken tibia from a fall on her front porch. There was nothing strange about her chart. No ID issues, no medical alerts. She was alert and oriented ×3. Vital signs stable. X-ray confirmed a clean oblique fracture mid-shaft. Ortho was paged. Pain was controlled with morphine, and she was set up in bed 17. She didn't talk, not even during triage. She didn't grunt, didn't cry. She just stared. I've had combative patients. I've had catatonic ones. I've had folks scream at me, and folks try to flirt with me while vomiting. But she wasn't any of those things. She was still. Her body was tense, but not afraid. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes, they locked onto mine like they were trying to burrow in. I went in the first time to assess her leg and ensure her IV site was patent. The air in the room wasn't cold, but I remember noticing how quiet it was. No TV, no family, no monitor beeping, because she'd declined telemetry. Just her eyes, following me the whole time. I asked her how it happened. No answer. I asked if she had allergies. Nothing. I did my job anyway, documenting everything carefully. Her name on the chart was Marie Caldwell, 48 years old. From an address in town I'd driven past 100 times. Nothing stood out. When I walked out of the room, I remember checking her entry on the board again. Still there, Caldwell, M. or leg FX. She was real. The second time I went in just before midnight was to bring her updated labs and explain that ortho would likely splint her tonight and schedule outpatient follow-up in the morning. Again, she said nothing, but the stare was even more focused. I thought maybe she was deaf, or selectively mute. I asked the charge to look into it. They didn't find anything on her record. By 1:15 a.m., she was discharged. Ortho placed a temporary splint, and she was to follow up in clinic on Monday. A tech wheeled her out in a transport chair. I remember because I handed over her discharge paperwork myself. She didn't take it, just stared at me while the chair turned away. She didn't wave, she didn't blink. I went back to her bay after she left. Bed 17 was already stripped. Nothing unusual, just some disposable Chucks pads. The IV pump still running with normal saline, ready to be unhooked. But her chart, gone. No discharge summary, no medication reconciliation, nothing on the whiteboard. I checked the EMR. No patient named Marie Caldwell listed that night. I refreshed it. I searched by time, by chief complaint. Nothing. I asked the unit clerk if she remembered printing her wristband. She frowned. Who? I described her. The woman in bed 17. Broken leg, silent, stared. The clerk blinked like I'd spoken another language. That bed's been empty all night. I asked the tech who wheeled her out. He looked confused. He'd never been asked to do a discharge for that bed. He'd just come back from lunch at the time I claimed she'd left. I asked charge. She pulled up the patient list. No record. She walked over to the ortho resident who'd been on. He swore he hadn't done any consults after midnight. Definitely not for a tibia fracture. He even pulled up his documentation for me. It wasn't there, and I know that man. He documents everything. Eventually I stopped asking, but I didn't stop wondering. I know what I saw. I know the tension in her limbs as I cleaned around the fracture site. I remember the dull gray of her eyes as she stared and stared. I remember how I wrote her name down on the dressing label, Caldwell, M, with the date. I remember scanning her ID bracelet into the MAR system. It beeped. I remember the beep. But if you look at that night's shift summary, bed 17 went unoccupied the entire shift. No notes, no meds, no X-ray order for a left tibia, no nurse-patient assignment logged. It was as if I made her up. I've worked in ERs long enough to know the mind can play tricks on you during night shift. Sleep-deprived, overstimulated, grieving someone in room 5, while treating someone in room 12. I've made charting errors. I've walked into the wrong room with meds before, but I've never hallucinated a patient, documented her, treated her, handed her off to no one, and I've never had a patient stare at me like she knew I would remember her, and no one else would. My name's Leah. I've worked as an ER nurse in the same level 1 trauma center for 17 years. People don't last long here unless they're cut from a certain cloth. Tough, focused, emotionally flexible. Most of us carry scars you won't see under scrubs. Some are the kind that time eventually smooths over. Some stay raw, no matter how many shifts pass. What I'm about to tell you, there's no scar. Exactly. It's more like a mark. Like someone drew a line in my memory and said, "Remember this, and don't try to explain it away." It was a Wednesday night, 3 to 11 shift. The staffing board had us short, as usual. That night we had a new hire on orientation. Her name was Melanie, mid-20s say, fresh out of nursing school but eager, observant, and surprisingly calm for her first week on a trauma floor. She'd been paired with me for her second evening shift. I liked her right away. She was quiet, asked smart questions, didn't complain when the code brown happened during dinner. She knew her way around a glucometer, respected isolation protocols, and actually read the chart before asking about meds. Around 9:40 p.m. we were at the nurse's station updating notes. I remember because I was charting on a GI bleed in room 8. Melanie glanced up, her fingers paused on the keyboard, and she said, "Hey, who's that nurse? The one with the bun and the tan scrubs." She just walked past the double doors. I looked up, no one was there. Our ER wears seal blue, always has, no tan scrubs. I figured she meant someone from housekeeping or dietary. "She wasn't EBS," she said quietly, almost as if reading my mind. She had a badge. I could see her shoes. They were those old white leather ones nurses used to wear. I still brushed it off. Long shift, bad lighting. Maybe she saw someone through the glass of the trauma bay. But about 20 minutes later, we were walking back from room 4, ankle laceration, when she stopped dead in the hallway. "She's here again," Melanie whispered. Her face lost all color. "I can feel her behind us." I turned. No one, just the hallway stretching back toward the med room, empty. "What do you mean, feel her?" I asked. Melanie didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It's like pressure on my back. Like I walked into a room someone else is already in. She's watching." I don't scare easily. I've coded teenagers. I've watched husbands tell wives that the stroke was too big to recover from. I've held the hand of a stabbing victim while we waited for the OR team that never came in time. But I know when something's changed in a room, even when nothing is visibly wrong. I watched Melanie's eyes that night. I saw it in her posture. She wasn't playing. She was uncomfortable in a way that was deeply physical. Later that night, while we were clocking out, I asked her what else she'd noticed. "She walks like she still belongs here," she said, "like she's just checking in on us. I don't think she wants to scare anybody, but she knows I can see her." That gave me pause, because back in 2016, we lost a nurse named Teresa. She'd worked in our ER for 8 years. She trained half the department, myself included, old school to the bone. She wore tan scrubs and those same leather clogs every shift. She kept her hair in a tight bun. She was found in her apartment one morning, gone from a cardiac arrest. She'd just worked her final night shift the week before. We don't talk about Teresa much anymore. Some of the younger nurses don't even know her name. But for years, people would say her med drawers would be pre-stocked before they got there. Blood gas results would mysteriously print before the order was signed. Vents would beep once, and then silence as if someone adjusted the settings. But no one was in the room. I never saw her. I never really believed in that stuff. But Melanie never knew about Teresa. She hadn't heard any stories. HR orientation didn't cover ghosts. 2 nights later, she asked me if Teresa used to carry a blue pen behind her ear. I stopped cold. That was something only the people who worked with her back then would know. Teresa always used a blue Pilot pen. Always. "She's not always here," Melanie said. "But when she is, I know I'm not alone. And she's watching me, like she's making sure I'm doing things right." I haven't said much to Melanie about it since. She still works here. She's one of our best. Fast hands, smart brain, heart in the right place. Sometimes she'll glance down the hall and go quiet for a moment. Then she'll carry on like nothing happened. Me, I still don't believe in ghosts. But sometimes when I'm in the med room late at night, I'll find an IV pump already primed, or the bin with 18-gauge angiocaths topped off, even when I haven't restocked it. And sometimes, just sometimes, I get the feeling that someone's still making rounds long after their last shift. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means everything and keeps these stories alive. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below, give it a like, and share it with someone who loves a good eerie tale. Thanks again for being here. You make all of this possible.